challenge that in some way, because I don't want to get down to the very end and all of a sudden we're all throwing up our hands saying, well, why did we go through this whole mess if they're not going to have to report anyway? So,
Chief, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I agree that we ought to do that. For one thing in that regard is the DA has said, don't make the penalties criminal. Make them civil penalties. Because the burden of proof in prosecuting a criminal case for an ethics violation is beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's a heavy burden to carry. But in the civil case, it's just a preponderance of evidence. So he's asking to take it away from make it a civil action. I think we ought to look at it that way, and maybe there's a way that we could ask that when these things when they happen, that our clerk could refer them to the district attorney's office as opposed to, or our I don't know how to do it. It's a sticky wicket, and we've never been there before. But I don't want to not do anything and then be sorry that we didn't make some effort to try to move forward. And what you're saying, and from my standpoint, Gary, is well taken, and I agree with you too, Pat. But I just want to. There is a sense of urgency. We have elections coming up in a year, and I would like to see if there is anything possible we can do to not have a instant replay of what happened.
Pete, in regards to Gary's comments, I think we could just adopt the federal election rules and have them apply at the state and local levels and achieve what you're trying to achieve. One thing that you won't be able to do is that 501c4 organizations do not have to disclose who contributes to them. And as long as they don't make independent expenditures their primary activity, keep it below 50% of expenditures, then they fall within the Internal Revenue Service guidelines. So you'll get a lot of what you're wanting to achieve, but that ability of a 501c4 organization to contribute to these campaigns, unless you somehow override the Supreme Court ruling, is always going to be there. But I think you'll achieve quite a bit if we can just adopt the federal election rules and have them applicable to the state and local rules, because they have to report anybody contributing more than $200 to a political campaign. Now, can a 501c4 contribute to a political campaign? Yes, and those people who support that 501c4 organization don't have to be disclosed, but at least you're finding out, that second level, not the third level, but the second level of who's contributing, and they always have to report who's making any political ads or expenditures as far as the political committee.
Comments at the Ethics Commission, and I thought they were very self-serving for the most part about, well, that the reporting requirement would be burdensome, that if you put reporting requirements on people, that will cause fewer people to run for office. I mean, to me, that is so disingenuous, it's hard to hold that thought in my head. I mean, the idea, like if the Oklahoma Public Employees Association gave money, then would you have to list the name of all the employees of the Oklahoma Public Employees Association? Well, you wouldn't, but I mean, it's a ridiculous question, because the Oklahoma Public Employees Association are people that work for the state of Oklahoma. I mean, that's good enough for me. The same is true with the union. I don't expect you to list every union member in the United States. If a union gives money, we know where that money came from. It came from unions. We know. You don't have to know the name of some guy in St. Augustine, Florida, that gave it to a PAC. I mean, it's the union PAC. We understand that. So I think that kind of stuff is disingenuous. OEA, the fact is, if you made them report who they are, they've got a list of their members. They could just nail it to the back of the disclosure thing, and you've got a list if you want to call them. But all these little barriers are being thrown in the way, and not by this group, but by others that are trying to find ways to delay disclosure, to avoid disclosure. And the Citizens United does not say you can't have disclosure. It says you can't put caps on money, which I personally think it's wrong, but that's now the law of the land, and I'm not arguing about that. I'm saying I want their names. I want to know who they are. And so to the extent we can do that, that's what I think we ought to be trying to do, because I think you'll stop some of this goofiness if your name has to be on it.
Pete, I think there's one other mechanism that can be utilized. My personal feeling is it's too late for our next elections, our March 2013 elections, to get any kind of meaningful change. I think if we were going to have a repeat, it's probably, I mean, I could be surprised, but I think it's probably too late to have any meaningful barrier. But one option is for the candidates themselves to very proactively say, this is not going to be allowed in this election. I think you're seeing that in Massachusetts in the Senate election, where the candidates have kind of come together and said, you know, we're not going to tolerate this. Oklahoma City is a big town, but it's not that big a town. If you want to try and come in with $500,000 into a city council election, there's only so many campaign consultants, there's only so many mail piece printers. We know who, you know, you can find out who, the idea that, wow, these independent expenditures, hundreds of thousands are being spent and we don't know who they are, I find that disingenuous. So what I would encourage, I'd like to see all the candidates who are running for city council to just come right out and say, we're not okay with this, and march right over to the chamber and tell them, and march right over to the unions and tell them, sit down with the Indian tribes and tell them, this is not okay, and we're not going to have an election like this. And I think if you see the candidates all in unison lock arms and say, this is not okay, it's not tolerable, if you do it, we're going to call you out, I think that's possibly the deterrent that we need.
What do you want us to do? I mean, do you want us to tell tell everybody not to support us?
No, just support it with disclosure. Don't do it anonymously. Don't come in and with all this negative campaigning and hide. And I mean, just if you come in, police and fire, they can participate in elections.
But that's permitted under the federal law.
What's that?
What they did was permitted under the federal law. They formed a 520C organization. Is that the right number?
501c4.
Okay. What's 527?
Well, that's an internal revenue code, no, for political organizations, but this is a tax-exempt one.
Okay. But I'm not worried about tax exempt as much as I am the concept of somebody not identified coming into the city and pouring an immense amount of money. And I'll have to admit, I was a beneficiary of that kind of effort, and I thank the people who contributed to it because I think they did the right thing. But I think I could paint or create in my mind a scenario where somebody ill-intentioned with lots of money could come in and influence a city election to the detriment of our citizens. And the example that popped into my mind was, what if somebody wanted to build a big casino here, where millions and millions of dollars are at stake, to spend $1 million or so in municipal elections to ensure that there was some sympathetic people on the council would not be out of the question. And that's the part that bothered me. I mean, I think what they did was right as far as I'm concerned. But at any rate, I do think there's a opportunity for mischief in this system as it is now. And I think Councilman Shadid's suggestion is one of those things that sounds good, but it wouldn't work. And I'm afraid that we're going to have something more than just the city council candidates saying they don't want this to happen.
It would work if you did it, if you said, I'm not going to accept contributions that are not disclosed.
But Pete, you don't get to accept those or deny those contributions. They're made entirely independent from the candidate. They're intended to be independent from the candidate by law.
You could still disclaim it. You could publicly say, any campaign material that you receive from anyone that's not disclosed, it's not part of my campaign, I don't have anything to do with it, and I don't approve of it.
Well, try to explain that to a voter whose mailbox is overflowing with mailings, that you didn't send them because your name's on them. It's not as easy as it sounds. Like I say, it sounds really easy and simple, but I don't think it's
I agree, but we didn't have any effort to try to do it last time.
But Pete, just like Pat said, explain it to that citizen who's gotten their 10th or 15th robocall, and they call you and say, hey, stop doing this. And you go, well, you tell me how and I will. You know,
I can tell you how. I could have told you how if you'd have called me. You go to the newspaper, and you say, this is a bad thing.
And you think the newspaper would print that? I'm sorry.
Well, then you spend some of your own money and put it in a campaign, and you mail it out to people.
And then we get another one of
Is
those
that
things
ugly?
thrown away because they're sick and tired of seeing Pat Ryan mailers. It sounds so easy, but I think it's much more difficult from a practical standpoint to do it.
Just 'cause
That's why we need rules. The fact
Because
that
it doesn't
nobody
work
did it.
100% doesn't mean you don't try. I mean,
Well, I agree with you, but I think our efforts would be better spent to try to create a structure whereby this occurs and not leave it up to the individuals.
they're not mutually exclusive. You can do both.
No, I mean, they could be both. We have so much resources and so much energy, and I think we ought to devote our energy and resources where we're most likely to have an impact. Otherwise, we spread our energies too thin, and we accomplish nothing. Just a personal standpoint.
Right? And this will be discussed at our next legislative committee meeting as well. Larry?
Yeah, I'd just like to use that as a point of making a comment. We do have, for our listeners out there, correct me if I'm wrong, a legislative committee which those of us on the council who have legitimate concerns like this is, come to the legislative committee with information, and the legislative committee decides whether they think that that is a good legislative agenda to go to our lobbyists and to our representatives, and then we bring that report, sitting on that, and Pete, you and I sit on that among others, we bring that report back to the council and say, we think that this is steps A, B, C, and D should be considered by the legislature. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so hopefully, as a result of this, we've already talked, Pete and I, that this would be a means for getting those ideas and moving them forward in the correct amount of time. From a personal experience, Francis has been my helper on this. I'm trying to get my political campaign for next year in concert with the new law that was put into effect, it became effective in November of last year. And that new law does change some of the reporting requirements. Correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, Frank. Does change the reporting requirements for you and I in reporting our campaign expenditures that are under the limits and are known who got the money from, and the timing that we have to do that to the state. And it has not been an easy task just finding out what the state is expecting in that. And it's now for an Attorney General opinion as to where that new law comes into effect. And so there's a lot of nuances in this that have to be looked at as we move forward. And I'm of the opinion we should move forward, but I think we have to be aware of the complexity of the situation. That being said, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute.